समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
You don't need me to tell you that there is emptiness in the skies and chaos at airports. Just go to any Indian airport, not even a major airport. You will see crowds of people disconsolate, hanging around, fighting as is inevitable, shouting at ground staff, people looking for bags that have now become invisible, that have been lost because the flights never took off. It's all because of IndiGo, as you probably know. If you were traveling IndiGo on one of these days, here's what would happen. You would check about your flight, you'd be told no problem, it can go. You would arrive at the airport and would be told the flight is delayed. And then there would be serial delays. At the end of those serial delays, when you'd waited for hours, they would cancel the flight. Sometimes they would board you, make you wait inside the plane, and then they would cancel the flight. You couldn't really do anything about it because the airline gave you no information. And if you went to find ground staff, they were difficult to find. But if you did find them, they were as clueless as you because IndiGo didn't give the ground staff the information they required. Perhaps that information was not available. I don't know. So you have to ask yourself what happened. Well, there are three components. So let's do them bit by bit. The first component is the pilots, because all of this, in a way, is about the pilots. It's well known in India that pilots are overworked. People talk about increasing their rest times, and the moment there is a crash of any kind, the airline says, oh, it's the pilot. So if it was pilot error and if the pilots are so overworked, it makes sense to give them a little more rest, not to work them to the bone. Fair enough. So about 2 years ago, the government evolved new flight duty limitation rules, which means how much time they can fly, how much they can fly at night, what kind of gap they have between flights. The airlines were not happy about this because this meant that they would get less work out of each pilot. But I think the courts upheld it, everybody upheld it. It was seen as a sensible measure, and the airlines were given enough time to cope with this, to hire new pilots, to be able to provide services. If you look at Air India, now Air India is a complicated airline because it consists of the old Indian Airlines in Air India, which never really merged completely, now Vistara, now also Air India Express, all coming together with different teams of pilots. And when they tried to rationalize, there were all kinds of arguments, people saying it will never happen, the pilots will never agree. But guess what? India's pilots are not the bad boys they used to be back in the 90s or even 15 years ago. They tend, on the whole, to be cooperative. And so the Air India experiment went through, the pilots agreed. And Air India kept its eye on the ball when it was asked to hire enough pilots to make sure that all these flights would take off. It complied. So did the smaller airlines. There was one airline that does not seem to have complied. And unfortunately for you and me, it's India's biggest airline, something like 60% of the market share. Why didn't it comply? Well, we'll come to that. But what happened essentially was that after these new rules were notified and pilots were given rest time, etc., IndiGo said it didn't have enough pilots. So because it didn't have enough pilots, it couldn't schedule the flights. Well, okay. But I mean, you must have known, right, that you didn't have enough pilots. You could have told people. They did not. Not only did they not tell people, they showed the flights as existing. And if you wanted to buy a ticket, they took your money. There was a pretty good chance, which they knew even if we didn't, that there would be no pilot that day, that there would be no possibility of that aircraft taking off. But they went ahead anyway. What happened was this: because all of these pilots were stretched to the limit and could not operate these planes, they were cancelled, and ordinary passengers were lied to, misled, told that flights will take off. So some people missed their weddings, their own weddings. Some people missed weddings they were attending in the family. Events that had been organized months before were cancelled because nobody could reach. People who had emergencies could not travel. People who had meetings fixed could not travel. Many of them were left in hope. They'd arrive for a 6 o'clock flight and be told, don't worry, we'll take off at 8. Okay, we'll take off at 10. Okay, we'll take off at 12, but you'll get there. At 6, they'd cancel the flight. So essentially, in terms of telling the people of India, sorry, we don't care for you, what IndiGo has done is unprecedented in the history of Indian aviation. So why? Why did it happen? Well, you know how IndiGo has grown. It's come out of nowhere really to become the largest airline in India. It's expanding routes all the time. It's going abroad. It is, for better or for worse, an extremely well-managed airline, an airline that has managed market dominance. So why would this well-managed airline, which is on the top of the market and prides itself on catering to customer and passenger needs, not know that there would be a pilot shortage? Isn't it obvious that you're not going to have enough pilots, especially as you continue to expand, introduce new routes, etc.? Mystery number one. There are more mysteries in this. Second, we come to the pilots. There was an era when they were the bad boys of Indian aviation. They were the highest paid government employees because in those days, Air India and Indian Airlines were government companies. And they were forever misusing that position, threatening the managements, causing panic. They were threatened to go on strike just before festive season. The government would panic. They would get what they wanted. They would report sick. They wouldn't turn up on flights. Flights would be cancelled. Managing directors of Indian Airlines particularly would be in a continual state of war with the pilots. It was a very unhappy situation. For me, the attitude of the pilots to India was summed up by the Babri Masjid demolition and its aftermath. This is the time when there were riots all over India. Eventually, Bombay burned. At this time, Indians needed to come together to fight the culture of hatred, to help each other. What did the pilots do? They went on strike. They didn't care about who they were inconveniencing or whatever. They were so focused on themselves. I think that's one of the reasons pilots got such a bad name. But that's changed. This generation of pilots don't seem to be like that. In fact, in the current situation, I would argue they are the victims, not the bad guys. Who are the bad guys? Well, think about it. It has to be some relationship between IndiGo and the government of India. The Civil Aviation Ministry, frankly, has no real reason to exist. It used to exist when it had Air India and Indian Airlines to look after. That's gone. All it needs to do now is regulate, keep a watch on airlines, look after the interests of passengers. It has failed signally in this role. If you know that India's largest airline is not recruiting enough pilots, if you know that the laws are going to be changed, the rules are going to be changed, and planes will not be able to fly without pilots, who are, of course, not available, then shouldn't you have raised the alarm? That's what these bureaucrats have paid large sums of money to do, right? Nothing happened. The Civil Aviation Ministry seems to be taken as much by surprise as we were. The minister put out press releases saying that he was doing a control room. What was he controlling? They were sitting there watching flights get cancelled, passengers become miserable. In fact, after his control room was established, IndiGo cancelled all flights from Delhi, so there was nothing for them to control, and it got worse and worse. The government, therefore, has most of the responsibility to blame. IndiGo is clearly the wrongdoer, but the government failed completely. Its duty is to the Indian passenger, not to the Indian airline owner. And yet it just sat back and let the passenger be treated badly, lose things, become miserable. Was there a game? Well, many people will say yes. Many people will say that IndiGo is too well managed to have not anticipated what would happen. What did it do? Well, it did really what the pilots used to do in the old days. It forced a situation just before the festive season when the government would panic. When there were thousands of people at airports not able to get onto flights, when there was chaos in the skies, they then went to the government and said, hey, we can fix this. But these rules you've introduced for pilots, put them in abeyance. We'll hire more pilots, but till then, we want business as usual. And this Civil Aviation Ministry, which is supposed to be monitoring things, supposed to be on top of things, which has its own little sweet control room, what did it say? It said, yeah, sure, guys, you do what you want to. And so those rules have been put into abeyance at least till February, by which stage IndiGo says it'll get its act together. You and I know it won't. It'll ask for a delay. This will go on. So forget about the ineptitude, the cowardly nature, and the panicky nature of the ministry, which has failed completely. Can anything be done now? Well, two things seem obvious, no? One is people were severely, severely inconvenienced. They lost God knows how much money because they could attend conferences and conferences. They lost so much emotionally. Surely it's up to the airline now to compensate them. To say, having kept them hanging around the airport and lying to them all day before cancelling their flight, don't worry, we'll refund your fare, is not enough. You've caused trauma, you've caused stress, you must pay for it. You must make up for it. And secondly, what about IndiGo? There are two options. One is it was incompetent and it didn't hire enough pilots and somehow didn't know. Two, that it was working to a stratagem designed to pressure the government into giving it what it wanted. There is no third possibility. Neither of these possibilities reflects well on the airline. It certainly reflects very badly on the airline's attitude to its passengers and to the way in which it kicks the government around. Any strong government would force IndiGo to pay compensation and would penalize IndiGo. What it has done is unforgivable. Will it happen? I don't know. I begin to wonder. Many, many times we've said that a duopoly is not good for any industry. We have Air India, we have IndiGo, and we have small players. Air India, to its credit, has functioned magnificently in this crisis, operating most of its flights. IndiGo has perhaps deliberately operated nothing. What happens, therefore, when somebody with 60% of market share abdicates? Well, that person holds the passenger to ransom, holds the government to ransom, holds India hostage. And of course, we've paid the ransom. They've got what they wanted. Is this a desirable situation? Should we allow oligopolies and duopolies in essential services? The government has taken the line that it will not interfere. It allowed Jet Airways to go bankrupt. It allowed Go to go bankrupt. In the case of Jet Airways, the suggestion that it wanted it to go bankrupt, even though it was clearly the best airline India had ever had. So the government can't say it's taken a hands-off attitude and then say the Civil Aviation Ministry exists to help passengers. What the government has done is help oligopolists, let down the citizens of India, let down Indian passengers, and allowed oligopolies to kick them around. Should you, as a passenger, stand for it? I don't think so.